Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Hello, hello. Welcome to this little video about persuasive sales presentations. Welcome to this little video on visuals in sales presentation. My name is Professor Randrup, and I'm teaching different courses where persuasive sales presentations is part of the curriculum. Visuals are typically part of any persuasive sales presentation in order to illustrate and capture the most important points that a salesperson does when they meet with potential clients and try to persuade them that whatever solution they're selling is relevant and should be adopted by the people that are listening to or that are using those types of solutions. Here you can see a business presenter talking about certain things and using a visual to illustrate the points trying to get across. When we start planning our sales presentation, we of course need to understand why we are there, and that's why we typically want to understand the situation from an audience perspective, because at the end of the day, those are the ones we need to persuade to be interested in our products, to want to try it out, and eventually also to buy the product. So our listeners, potential customers, if you want, when they listen in on a presentation, they typically want a number of different questions answered in that presentation. So standard things that they're looking for information about would be who, so who are you that's speaking, and why you were speaking to us or to me. So that's one thing that the presenter needs to include in the presentation. After that, they will typically have questions that relates to what is going on. So what is this all about and why do I need to know it? After that, so what should I care and how whatever you are presenting can help me or the potential client. And then last but not least, why they should do anything. In fact, if they should do something, how they should do it, and what should they do now. So those would be the standard questions that an audience normally expects to get an answer to during a presentation. On the other side, when a presenter looks at a presentation and prepare for it, there's also a set of questions that the presenter goes through in order to figure out what and how to present content. So first of all, why the presenter is talking to these people, what we want them to know, think, and do after the presentation. We want to keep an eye on how much time we have available. Also, what of everything we can tell them we need to tell them in order to get a good response. And then what do we show them that support the messaging and make sure that the presentation becomes effective. On the execution side, we have to decide how we're going to tell them our messages and how we're going to tell them about our solution. We also have to consider how we create excitement and a motivation, because not a lot of people are willing to buy things or do something different unless they are a little bit excited and motivated to do something about their current situation. Another thing we have to consider when we are presenting is, of course, the practicalities. So there's not something of a practical nature that gets into the way of us delivering an effective message. And last but not least, as presenters, we need to think a little bit about how to secure the results needed. What are the results that we need? And how do we secure that we get these results? Now, when we deliver a presentation, it's the full presentation that's supposed to work. And that's why when we look at visuals, visual is just one part of a presentation. So normally we will have planned out a presentation of what type of information we need to present and in what order. We will typically have a script that tells us a little bit about the progress of the presentation. And then once we have that information, then it's time to consider what type of visuals can support the sales presentation. And that's why we don't start with producing visuals before we know exactly what the presentation is going to be about, what type of content we're going to put in it, and also not before we have some kind of a script prepared for the sales presentation. Now, when we talk about visuals, we're not just talking about PowerPoint. So anything of a visual nature can help a sales presentation. One of the very common things that we see in a lot of presentations is that we might not even start with a PowerPoint slide. We might start with showing some kind of an artifact. And an artifact would also be a visual that can be used in presentations. Sometimes it is just more practical to either bring a video or a photo or even a drawing into the presentation in order to show the artifact. If we are using these type of representations, we typically can throw them into a PowerPoint, so the PowerPoint can hold these types of visuals in order to present them in an effective and also practical way to the participants in the sales meetings. Now, there can be other things that we can use as visuals. We can use pictures. In PowerPoint, we can use keywords, we can use graphs, we can use live videos, we can use audio, so sound. We can use our own movement or movement of things, and then we can use lighting. So there's a number of different elements that actually can help us deliver an effective sales presentation. Visuals typically supplement the oral presentation. So when we plan visuals, of course, it has to be integrated with the story that we are telling in a sales presentation. Now, let's take a look at these visuals here. On the top left, we have a classical illustration with some headlines, a little photo to exemplify what we are talking about, and a question. So this could be one type of visual. Another type of visual could be a light show. We're showing something in 3D, for instance. We could also just have one photo without any text on to create a background for a message, or we could show a video. The lower one on the right side here is taken from a Monty Python show that shows a business person doing something really stupid. And if we have a message that relates to that, that could be an effective and also humorous way to present certain type of content in a presentation. All of these are visuals. Now, why do we bring in visuals? Well, as the old saying goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And that's also what we use in sales presentations, because we might talk about certain things, but talking about certain things might not ensure understanding, but using a visual support can typically make the difference. For instance, let's say we are talking about the last 10 years sales of a product per month. We cannot just ramble through all those numbers. But if you show a graph, it is much easier for the audience to grasp what we are telling them about. Now, visuals is then chosen elements in order to support the story we are telling in the sales presentation. So typically, we are thinking about what are the most important content we want the audience to get from a presentation, and we pick these important content elements out for visualization support. We also use visualization typically to show a solution. So during a sales meeting, when we are talking about or presenting or trying to sell a solution, it is also much smarter to show the actual solution than just to talk about it and show the different things about the solution we want to highlight. So obviously, we also use visual support to illustrate the solution that we might be proposing a company or a customer to adopt. Visuals can also be used to create an atmosphere in order to create engagement and motivation. So that's also a factor that visuals can help us with. Definitely can underline the key points, and then you can also visualize core insights, so we have a better understanding of the concepts we are talking about than we can just describe by words. And sometimes words plus visuals create a better understanding and also makes people remember better what we have been talking about. Now, when we set up a PowerPoint, we can't say what is a good PowerPoint because it depends on the purpose of the PowerPoints. So consider these three situations. So first of all, we are giving a sales presentation, but we don't have any intentions of handing it out, but we want to use the PowerPoints to support the message in the sales presentation. So in this case, we can use illustrations. We typically use as little text as we can to support the oral points and the storyline. And basically, we don't have any need for implementing a lot of text in the slides because the oral presentation gets the story flowing, where the visuals, so the PowerPoints, are effective visualization on certain points in order to underline what we're talking about. So that is one type of PowerPoint slides or one type of visuals. In another situation, we might plan to hand out the visuals after the presentation in order for the ones that participated, so the target audience, to be able to retain the content of our presentation. Now think about this for a second. If you're handing out a bunch of PowerPoints during a presentation and people take it, typically they take them so they have some notes from the presentation in case they want to revisit what the presentation was about the following week. Now, if then the participants in a presentation, they get the notes in the form of a PDF with the PowerPoints, and then next week, 1 week after the presentation, want to revisit the major points or review certain elements from the sales presentation. It could be about the technical solution, could be about the technical solutions business case or something like that. Now, if this document cannot be understood as a piece of documentation a week, 2 weeks, or a month after the fact, then it's not good documentation. So therefore, in this situation, we cannot just have a bunch of photos or a bunch of graphs, but we also want to include the major storyline and the key points. So people, by also looking at the text, can understand and remember exactly what the major points were behind the different points in the presentation. So therefore, in this situation, the PowerPoints will include short abbreviated text that can communicate the core content. So when someone is reviewing the presentation PowerPoints a week or 2 weeks after, still get the main points of the storyline, so they can retain a lot of the information by using the PowerPoint document that they have received as a triggering point for remembering the major points, the major insights, and the major information they got from the presentation. The third situation can be that we go to a customer to do a presentation, and the presentation and the PowerPoint is a report or is a brochure or something like that we want to give to the audience after we have been through the meeting. So in this sense, the actual PowerPoint will be the full report or will be the full brochure or similar things. If that is the type of PowerPoint we use in a presentation, so that means it has to be the brochure to keep all the insights in there, That's when we set up PowerPoints with a lot more text. So that would be with full sentences, bullet points, illustrations, graphs, and everything else that's needed in order to, in writing, communicate what we are talking about during the sales meeting. So in this situation, the PowerPoint will be full of text, different core conclusions, and all the relevant information, because the PowerPoint slides themselves need to be the brochure and not just support an oral story. So that is why when you plan out PowerPoints, you have to understand what role the PowerPoints will have for that presentation. And that's, again, why we can't say that a good PowerPoint has 2 photos and 5 words on it. That can be true for a type A or maybe even a type B of these PowerPoint slides. Whereas if we plan to give it out after the presentation to retain most of the content, it would definitely not be the way to go, because then it would only satisfy the type A purpose up here in order to support the oral story, and where there's no intention of handing it out after the presentation. Now, let's take a look at a couple of different visuals and talk about how we communicate things. Now, on the top left one, you see some of the most important conclusions written out in words. Now, that can be important if you want to retain the main message, especially if people are looking at your PowerPoints a week, 2 weeks, 5 weeks after the actual presentation. However, if we are only wanting to emphasize some of the key conclusions, then we might have the slide you see here on the top left that just says plus 25% or plus 85%. Let's say that is the added value after a year of use of a new software or new tech solution in order to enhance what we're talking about. Now, we could also show that 85% increase with a graph. So if we are talking about 85%, we can then show a graph that shows the increase in sales over time and indicate what these 85% is all about. So that would be another way to talk about the significant increase in sales by adopting a new kind of software. The fourth way we could tell that story was talk a little bit about what makes a software effective, and we can tie that in to a video again here about a new, funny, but very attentive way to walk as a business person. That would be a more humorous approach, but that would still also be able to tell the story about the 85% sales increase using a new system. So that's 4 different ways to support the same storyline. And the question is then, which form will be the better one in order to communicate your message? And that, of course, depends on the situation. There can be merits in all of them, depending on the purpose that you have. Now, for business-to-business sales presentations, we do know that most people that buy will need to be triggered by an economic value add by doing or buying some type of a product. And in order to understand that type of business value, we typically want to also provide more documentation in a more professional manner. And in that situation, if I were to choose one of these forms, I would choose the graph, because it reminds people of something that's maybe a little more scientific, something that's data-based, and it is an illustration of where it goes to and from. So that's why a more serious type of documentation would probably be leaning towards the third graph here in the lower left corner as the best type of visual for that type of situation. Now, let me show you another couple of types of visuals we typically see in executive level presentations. The top left one and the lower one on the right side are all coming from classical management consulting presentations for top executives. So in this way, we have a specific way to set up visuals. You can see some commonalities, and let me go through them. So the 3 major elements in typical management consulting slides is built up of key information. That would typically be this type of illustration or this text table, or in this one, it would be information about the German furniture market with some market development numbers and other elements that's included in that. So that would be the key information. The next step would be, so what does this tell us? So we have another area in the slide, in the lower right one, it would be the key findings. So what is this slide telling us? And what is the take-up of the slide? That's what we put in the top line. So the major conclusion in the slide is given in the top line. Here it is German RTA market is highly attractive. The outlook is promising. So that would be the conclusion for this slide. The same thing is happening up here. We have illustrations. We have a little title that shows us what is in this, what is this one, and why is it interesting. And then we have the major takeaway or the major conclusions up in the title. These types of slides are abundant in management consulting presentations because in many situations, these ones are the report. This is the report we will hand out after a presentation that we have given. Why would we hand them out and why are they important? Well, it spells out the key information. It spells out what does this show us, and it gives a conclusion on every single slide. So that's why this type of slide will be the ones that best retain information, especially if whoever is listening to our sales presentation or pitch presentation needs to take a look at the core content after the fact, and if they have then received this document as support after the presentation. Now, we can also see other types of solutions. So up here on the right side, we have a distribution selection map. So this is a map that helps us identify what kind of distributions a data set has. Now, this is one model that's shown. So this is an example of a model, but there's not any other insights listed in the text of how we should use it and why it's relevant for this presentation. So if we are presenting and talking orally about why a software is really great and how a software works, let's say, how does it identify distribution? This can be used in order to explain how it does that. But on this one, there's no text that tells us what is it saying. So if we're looking at this one a week or 2 weeks after a presentation, we have to remember that there was a distribution selection map. And if we need it, then we can go find this model in this presentation, but it doesn't give us the context and it doesn't really tell us why and how this is involved in a new, let's say, a new analytical software that we're considering to use. And it's the same thing with this one. This doesn't have any contextual information. So it doesn't really tell us sales of what, over what period, and what type of product is it. So here, this is also a good one to support an oral presentation, but not great if someone wants to read about what was this all about a week or a month after the fact. So that's an example where in certain presentations where we want to illustrate and pick out some major points, but don't want to necessarily hand out a full storyline in our PowerPoints, these two would be good for oral presentations without necessarily handing things out, whereas these ones would be better if we are also handing out the slides after the presentation in order for the content of our presentation to be retained better by the audience. So that's again why you've got to select a context for your presentation and a purpose for your visuals before you can decide what type of visualizations will probably be the best for you to have in a PowerPoint presentation. Now, before I talk a little more about that, PowerPoints can be used to create atmospheres. So instead of talking about it, let me show you a couple of slides that are typical to create a certain atmosphere. So let's say I was going to talk to Starbucks about how to make their sales more effective. Instead of working with a black background or a white background and just talking to them, I can then use pictures like this to create atmospheres about the storyline that I have. So let's say I'm talking a little bit about good cafes and what makes them good. I can, with this illustration, create an atmosphere around what does it mean to be a good restaurant, to create an idyllic picture of a business and an interesting high-class type of a cafe environment. So this, just showing you this picture, will get you in a certain mode, will make you think about exclusivity, French cafes, things like that. Let me show you another one. So this one, you can see here that if I was standing up and talking about new findings, and we've done some research and we found some key insights about customers, all of these show a situation where we actually talk to customers, we interview them. So this kind of photos will highlight what we have been doing and underline a situation where we've done some research. So that would be a good backdrop to illustrate what we are talking about and not just by oral saying, oh, we analyze your customers and this is what you said. So this one will supplement and give an atmosphere to a story we're only talking about in words. These photos are photos that can help dramatize certain elements. So let's say we are selling a new type of retail software to cafes, and we're talking about some of the benefits. So one of the benefits would be that customers will have a little more time with the waiters. That will make them enjoy whatever happens in the cafe a little bit more. So when we talk about those benefits, we can actually illustrate and dramatize those benefits by showing customers in cafes that are having a really good time, because that's what most cafe owners want their customers to look like. So this could be supporting the message of certain types of benefits. This is an example of where we might talk about problems with a business. So here you can see we are giving illustrations of customers that are not happy with different things. The two top photos illustrate a dissatisfaction with products. The lower right one shows a little bit about long lines. That also is an irritation point for people, especially people that are in a rush. So this is, again, a backdrop, could be a backdrop to dramatize and provide information about different types of issues. Now, why would we use illustrations like that? Well, it is difficult in a spoken word to have people remember what you said. So if we don't emphasize certain of things we say by visuals, then people will simply not remember it. And that's why visuals makes it possible to dramatize and make the major points more memorable in a presentation. So that is why we choose visuals after what are the most important things of supporting in a story to a potential customers. One of the things we of course know that matters to potential people that should buy our products is to see the product, but also to understand the benefits of the products. And that's why those are typically normally elements that we include in a sales presentation, and we include visuals about that can dramatize those elements. Now, this is another illustration with photos where we talk about a benefit, and I'm sure you can probably recognize it here. Here we see employees at the cafe having a good time. So this could, for instance, be a backdrop for talking about increased employee satisfaction, but much differently than if I just mentioned that by word. So this illustration will dramatize and show incidents of employee satisfaction or signs of employee satisfaction that can be a good supplement to reminding people that we are talking about employee satisfaction when we present that in words. Another thing to consider when you do a presentation is typically to introduce who you are or the team that you represent. So that's why PowerPoints or illustrations or presentations of the team behind the solution or the team that's here in the room, we typically also want to present either ourselves or the people that we represent. And there's many ways to do that. Here's a couple of examples. So if we want to present a team, we can make a little PowerPoint chart like this. If you run a more advanced video, you can actually have a more advanced PowerPoint, you can actually have a little video stream where you can activate the PowerPoint and you can show video. So in this case, Enzo, for instance, might be shown like this. When I click on Enzo, he gives a 10-second introduction of himself, and the same can be done by Ty, Marisi, and Charlotte. So there can be many versions of how to bring alive content in a PowerPoint presentation. Now, another thing about PowerPoints is that they can also be used to help you when you actually shoot a video of a sales presentation. So there's many ways to support you when you do things. So the classical way for a live presentation, so you don't forget the storyline, is to produce the cue cards. I'm not sure if you've seen them before and maybe also use them. So that would be the classical tool if you're giving a live presentation somewhere in order to keep you and hold you to the story so you know exactly what you're talking about and what you show on the PowerPoints. So if you take a look at these cue cards, what you can see here, there are some core notes about what the presenter is going to talk about. And then also you can actually see what type of stuff should be shown or visualized at that part of the story. So that is an example of a tool that helps you deliver a live presentation. Now, if you tape a presentation, there's a couple of ways to do it. You can freestyle it, as you can see up here on the right side, where you can actually have a more dynamic video, an action video. So that is one way to shoot a video of a sales presentation. The classical ways, and this comes from the world of TV, this is where you have a camera behind a teleprompter. So this would be an example of a teleprompter where you can stand maybe 10, 15 yards away and then give a presentation, full video on, and then still remember what you're saying. Now, if you're sitting in front of a computer with a camera, so that could be a Zoom meeting or something like that, this setup could be kind of nice where you talk to the camera at the top, and then you have the notes in front of you and know what you need to talk about. So there's a number of different ways to set up how you deliver a presentation, and part of that could actually be visuals and, for instance, PowerPoint notes that support your presentation. Now, again, a sales presentation that is done by video. We have a few more cool things to do, because when we do a video production, we can actually take the sales presentation over and over and over again until we are satisfied with the sales presentation. So that's why when we do sales presentation on videos, we use editing software and we lay things over so we can make an even more professional presentation and have a chance to edit it before we go live with the actual sales meeting. If we are giving the sales meeting face-to-face, of course, we do not have this opportunity. In that situation, we will rather have to do different kinds of dry runs or test runs where we speak through our sales presentation. Maybe we have a few buddies or colleagues listening to us, and we're trying to hone the quality of the storyline, also the quality of the visuals, so we know that the visuals and the storyline fits well together. So this is what I wanted to say about PowerPoint presentation. So it's a very, very good tool for presentations. There's no standard formula for what is a good PowerPoint. However, there are a couple of core conclusions, and let me just remind you of them for what we use PowerPoints for in a presentation. First and mainly, we are using them to present very important content in a sales presentation. Again, that can be the product we're selling, it can be the problem it's solving, it could be benefits, it could be the value proposition, it could be the financial results or similar elements in the sales presentation. So you can see here, present important content, show the actual solution, so bring your solution to life. It can be used to create a good atmosphere, highlight certain elements, underline key points, and then visualize insights so people understand those insights better than if you just spoke them by word. Hopefully this little presentation has been interesting for you. It's a little presentation about PowerPoints and visuals in persuasive sales presentations.